first time my wife has ever grabbed me from the back. Excuse me, I'll have to apologize up front. On the way down here yesterday, I could talk better than I can now. I gradually was developing some sort of code, whatever.
He may have to turn his lapel
So,
on.
bear with me.
Turn his lapel on.
Talking. I've asked God not to give me. It says it's on.
Now try it. Okay, talk.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
I've asked God not to give me total healing, just to get me through the completion of the lesson, which I think we can do. We appreciate very much the opportunity to be here and the accommodation last night. Quite outstanding. It was a beautiful place, very functional, and we thank you for that. I asked permission to tell you about a couple of books, because if I don't tell you about it, the odds are in your lifetime you will hear about it. I have written 2 devotional books. One of them is on Gospels. So the idea is to read through the Gospels in the course of the year in the best, as well as we can tell, the chronological line. And if you do, then you will have read all 4 Gospels in the year, and the devotional thoughts that go with them. I did this in 2019. This year, only a month ago, this book came out, which is Paul's letters, all of Paul's letters, same kind of format, reading through the letters of Paul each day. And then, so you're reading the text, and then you're reading the accompanying thoughts that you usually have in a devotional book. The books are $20. If you buy them at Barnes & Noble or Amazon, it'll cost you more. The class is just $20 flat, nothing else. Or we can mail them to you. We'll be glad to talk to you about them. But we found that this time of year people want to know about devotional books, which are exceedingly popular because of Christmas gifts and all. So I want to tell you about them. And if we can visit with you about it, this one on Gospels is from morning to evening. The one on Letters of Paul is called Living in His Grace. We'd be glad to discuss either of them with you or whatever. So please speak to me. Actually, you'll be better to speak to Deborah. She is my literary agent. Actually, she's my literary everything, but she can help you with this. We live in a world of words. I don't know if you've ever thought about how many talk shows there are. You turn on the television in the daytime, it's just talk shows, people just talking. You can turn on the radio, we have political shows and just talk shows, we have sports call-in shows. People just, and the crazy thing about it is that we actually call this entertainment. If you think about it, we're sitting and listening to people who are just talking. And it's not like they're talking about facts necessarily, they're just giving their opinion. Now, I've never once called into a call-in show, a talk show. But I do occasionally, if I'm out in my vehicle, I'll listen to sports call-in shows. And it amazes me that the people who call in, they'll say, well, I've been on hold, for an hour and 20 minutes. And I'm thinking, an hour and 20 minutes, you've just been waiting to give your opinion? And that's all they are. Everybody calls in at the end of the 3 hours. We've had all these people give their opinion, and they were just opinions. Who's going to win, who's not going to win, why we like the coach, why we don't like the coach, or whatever it is. Or if it's politics, it's the same way. We'd love to give our opinion. But it's just a mass of words. I was curious about this, so I looked up to see if there was any kind of research or study. And it's, I think you'll be a little stunned by the numbers, but It is said that the average person hears or reads between 20,000 and 30,000 words a day. Now, I'm guessing most of us are thinking, I don't hear that many words. But you don't realize how many are coming. How many are coming at you if you listen to the radio or you watch television or something. And maybe that's just supposed to be an average for each day rather than you have that many every day. But let's just suppose that you're in the middle and you hear or read 25,000 words a day. That's 175,000 words in a week. That is 9,125,000 words in a year. Just think, since the time you've been old enough to know words and listen to words and so on, is it possible that you've listened to more than 9 million a year? How many of those do you remember? How many conversations do you remember? Not very many. In fact, of all the words that have been said to us, and of all the words that we have read, there's just a very few that will stay with us for a lifetime. And they fall into two categories. One category is a category of where people say something that just lifted us, made us feel so good, we've never forgotten what they said about us. And the other category are the ones that wounded us so deeply, and we've never forgotten what they said to us. Words are powerful. Most of us grew up with a little saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, words will never break me. It wasn't true. Words do hurt. And they hurt for a very long time, long after they've been said, because they're imprinted in our brain. We've never forgotten. The millions of words you've heard, you've never forgotten the ones that you. Did you ever consider that most church splits take place because of things said? I mean, I rarely read about a church dividing because somebody pulled a gun in a business meeting. We split because we argue, we fuss, we grumble, we slander, we gossip over whatever the issue is, but it's our words. It's our words that drive us apart most of the time. I'm not saying there aren't issues that we might not divide over, but usually the issues we divide over are usually just matters of opinion and judgment, which means we just divide over the words. What about you this last week? Did you say anything you regret? Would you like to go back and at least start over or have another chance to say it? We have in our mouth a little 2-ounce slab of muscle called tongue. It helps us chew, it helps us taste, it helps us swallow food. It also helps us get in trouble. In our country, in our culture, to handle a potentially dangerous weapon, or I shouldn't say weapon, but to handle something that's considered potentially dangerous, you have to have a license. So if you want to drive down the highway, you've got to read the manual, you've got to take a written test, and then you have to practice driving, and then you have to prove you can drive before they'll give you a license. If you want to fly an airplane, it's the same pattern. You have to read through the manual and study it all, and you take a written test, and you have to take lessons, and you have to take a test and demonstrate proficiency before you can have a license. Every one of us has got a tongue, potentially dangerous. Nobody has a license. So what we need some kind of instructions, and that's where James comes in James chapter 3, and what we have here is what every tongue owner should know. What every tongue owner should know. I'm guessing you're familiar with James chapter 3, but we're going to revive it in your thoughts again today. you look at the opening verse, not many of you should act as teachers, my brothers, because you know that we who teach we judge more strictly. Now, I have to say that I don't know, and I've never read a really good explanation of exactly what James is trying to do here, beyond just encouraging teachers to realize they have a responsibility, and not everyone ought to be a teacher. And then he goes on to talk about the tongue, and certainly that would apply to teachers, but he doesn't seem to limit it. It's not a limited thing just to teachers. So then we pick up in verse 2, we're going to read down into verse 5. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect or mature man, able to keep his whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. I think James, first of all, is saying tongue control is a key factor in control of living. Tongue control is a key factor in control of living. If you can control your tongue, you can control the rest of it. The way James says about it, he says, if anyone is never at fault in what he says, perfect man, mature man, able to keep his whole body in check. He says, we might say he assumes, that if you can control your mouth, you can control the rest of it. Now you're going to say, well, I don't know about that. Well, he has two analogies to demonstrate the truth of himself. He says you have the bits in the mouth of the horse. And you have the rudder on the ship. Now each one is very small. The bit is small compared to the size of the horse. The rudder is very small compared to the size of the ship. But his point is, this little thing gives direction. It tells which way we're going to go. The horse doesn't decide, the ship doesn't decide, it's the bit and the rudder. So if you can control the little thing, you can control the big thing. If hateful speech comes out of your mouth, the odds are really good. Your behavior will reflect hatefulness as well. If your mouth, your tongue is undisciplined, the odds are pretty good. There will be other parts of you undisciplined as well. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like the way that sounds. Because I want to believe that even though one part isn't necessarily under control, that doesn't mean I haven't got it, the rest of it under control. But James says, tongue control is a key factor in controlling the whole person. And I think we know in our hearts that he's got it right. Then look at the latter part of verse 5 into verse 6. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a word of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. That's a pretty indicting statement about the tongue. He doesn't say that, the Bible doesn't say that about any other part of the body. Now, it addresses other parts of the body and says things, but this is the only place that talks about a part of the body and likens it to fire. Just as the rudder is so small and yet turns the ship, and the bit is so small compared to the horse and directs the horse. Each of them, major factor in what happens. The tongue is a fire. It's like a little spark that sets aflame the whole forest. Little things making a big difference. Now, I think that most people have the idea that what they say is really a small matter in the scheme of things. In other words, if I don't go out and rob a bank, or I don't go out and murder somebody, that's good. But it wouldn't compare if I said something ugly to someone because it's not the same category. These are really terrible, heinous things. But your tongue, people say things all the time. I think we wouldn't dismiss murder, but we would dismiss what we do with our tongue. James doesn't allow us to do that. He says the tongue is a fire, a world of evil, corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is set on fire by hell. And at the end of verse 8, he will say it's a restless evil full of deadly poison. Now, you just line all those statements up, and I would say that's a pretty powerful statement about the potential of the tongue in terms of evil. But when you read all those things, fire, world of evil, corrupts, life on fire, set on fire by hell, does any one come to mind? And I don't mean another person, so if you're thinking about somebody, that's not what I'm doing. Who comes to mind? The devil. That's stuff of the devil. That's a part of the devil. The devil is associated with fire and corruption and evil. Is James not giving us a really strong warning here? I think he does that because I think he knows our temptation is not to take this seriously. Sort of write it off as it's not a big deal. Sure, I lost my temper. I said yes, but it's no big deal. People lose it all the time. James says it's a big deal. Proverbs 21, verse 23 says, the person who keeps their mouth and tongue keeps themselves out of trouble. I think James is telling us the tongue control saves you from harm. Because all he's talking about here in verse 6 is harm. Things is harm. It corrupts, it's evil. But tongue control saves you from harm. This idea about corrupts the whole person. I don't know if you've thought about it, but this is the only place in the Bible that says there's something about us, some part, that corrupts the whole person. Now we have something close to that in 1 Corinthians 6 when Paul talks about sexual sin. And it says sexual sin is not like other sins. If you sin sexually, you sin against your own body. So that's a little more of a personal kind of thing. But this is the only place that it says it corrupts. And I think the statement in 1 Corinthians 6 is in essence talking about corrupting the whole body. But James says what you do with your tongue corrupts the whole body. I think we live with the view that our parts are isolated. It's like, this doesn't affect this, and this doesn't affect that, and so on. It's when people get up and they say, well, I made a mistake, and that's really not me, and so forth. Politicians do that all the time. Sports people do that all the time. They get caught doing something and say, well, that's not me. That's not really me. Let me tell you, if you did, that's really you. Now, I understand what you're trying to say. You're trying to disassociate yourself from that person because you really realize, you don't want to be that person. Well, that's understandable. But that's you. You can't disassociate. So if you said it, then you said it. That's you. Came out of you. We look for ways to sort of separate and disassociate. James says you can't do that, it corrupts the whole person. A third thought in verse 7 and 8. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and creatures of the sea are being tamed and have been tamed by man. But no man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. James says that tongue control is required as long as you have a tongue. You never come to a day and say, well, today I completed all my assignments regarding the tongue, I've got it done. Now I got a few other things to work on, but the tongue, I got that part. Okay. Now I'm guessing that some of you, probably most of us, would say, well, I've lived this long and there's some things I did and that was wrong. I'm not going to do that again. And we feel like we've conquered that. We put that behind us. You never do that with the tongue. You never say, I don't have to think about my tongue anymore. You always have to be alert. If you think about what James is doing, he says, you've got all these animals and we've tamed them. And it's pretty incredible. Now, I don't know that you're going to see this in the circus again because animal rights groups have sort of eliminated elephants out of the circus and so on. They get up on each other's back and all that. But my point is, it's incredible that we can tame such a large animal to do certain things. We went to SeaWorld a few years ago, watched all the porpoises and dolphins jump through hoops and do all this kind of stuff. You know, it's amazing that you can train these animals of the sea to do things. I mean, we're just shocked that you can do that. And if you ever watched America's Got Talent, you see dogs hop across the stage and jump and do all kinds of dances and stuff. It's amazing that we can train an animal to do those things. James says we can do that. Can't tame the tongue. A little bit of muscle in your mouth. Can't tame that. Now, I didn't say it couldn't be tamed. He just said it can't be tamed by man. You can surrender to the Lord and seek to do His will, and that's as close as you'll come. Can't tame the tongue. What does that mean? It means my whole life I've got to be alert to what goes on with my tongue. As long as I've got a tongue, I'm going to have to engage in some kind of tongue control. Never going to conquer that completely. There are a couple of passages that should go along with what we're saying this morning. In fact, let's just turn and read one of them. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Nothing out of your mouth unless it builds up his tongue. I violated that a long time ago, and too many times since. But I think it underscores how the Bible looks at our tongue in a way far more seriously than we do. Then in verses 9 through 12, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Tongue control is an index of the heart. An index of the heart. If you have a foul mouth, you've got a foul heart. Now see, that's where we don't really want to believe that. If you were to approach someone that I trust you to know them really well, maybe have a friendship with them, but you wanted to speak to them about their foul mouth, how do you suppose they would take it if you said, you have a foul mouth? The reason is because you have a foul heart. Now, hopefully, if they're a really good friend, they won't slay them. Because you see, they already know, if you're living a Christian life in front, they already know you hear what they say, so it's not like they can deny they have a foul mouth. But when you start talking about a person's heart, that's who the person really is. So I'm not suggesting you make a habit of doing that. I'm just saying that's what the Bible says. What comes out of my mouth is a reflection of my heart. Now you may say, oh, I just lost my temper and it just popped out. Where did it come from? It just popped out. Where did it pop out from? From your heart. What James does is he mentions things that cannot happen. So he says, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? Can happen. Can fig trees bear olives? Can't happen. Can grapevine bear figs? Can't happen. Those things can't happen. You can't have foulness coming from pure heart. Purity doesn't come from a foul heart. Can't happen. We want to believe it can. We want to believe we can act one way, but yeah, really we're okay inside. We're not all that bad. I don't know what the Bible says. Our words are messengers from the heart. Messengers from the heart. Now, I want us to read one more place in the verse. Matthew chapter 12, verse 33. Jesus says, make a tree good and its fruit will be good. Or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. And by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Two things I want you to remember about this. First of all, James is only echoing Jesus. What James says in chapter 3 is what Jesus says right here. Well, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And then he gives us these little lines. The good man, out of his good treasure, brings forth good things. The evil man, out of his evil treasure, brings forth evil things. What comes out is a reflection of what's inside. But the second thing I want you to think about is that Jesus is saying that every word involves God. Every word. From the day that you spoke your first word, every word involves God. And we spoke words long time ago in our early days in innocence. There's a lot we didn't really know. From the time that we knew right from wrong, and we understood the words we were choosing and using, every word you've spoken involves God. You've never said a word that didn't involve God. Now, I'm guessing most of us, and certainly much of the world, doesn't think about it like that. Every time I open my mouth, whatever I say involves God. What comes out is because of what's inside. We've already established the words are powerful, but I think you would have agreed to that idea even before I mentioned it. Which means that this week, you can't undo what you've said, you can't go back and re-say it. I guess you could go to someone and say, I'm sorry, but you have a fresh day, a fresh week. Keep in mind that you can literally impact somebody's week. You can make their week, make their day, make their year, by what you say. People to lift up, people to comfort, people to encourage, maybe even people to rebuke. And love. But with your words, you do make a difference. They are powerful. The worst thing would be for us to dismiss them and say, they don't make any difference. It's just a conversation. Don't dismiss it. What you say matters. What I say matters. Jesus says so. Now, one thing I always know about this lesson, everybody's got a tongue. I didn't miss anybody in here. And we're all in this together. None of us are perfect. None of us have it conquered. So we all share in the same challenge. But I hope it'll encourage you, remind you of something that is really important that we tend to sort of let slide. And I hope that it'll make a difference in your life and in somebody else's because of the way you speak. If there is anything that we can do to encourage you in this or anything, then we want to do that. We can pray with you or for you about something in your life. We want to do that. Any way that we can help. Invite you to come along and stand.